I am going to just take and take and take, push down, push down, push down, because I don't want to bother you. I don't want to bother that person. I don't want to set a boundary. I don't want to rock the boat.
Hi, I'm Lydia Thompson, and I am the host of Counselor Off the Clock. My aim is to make mental health conversations more accessible and to keep you company while you grow. This episode, we have Shantell Johnson-Jones, a counselor in Nashville and owner of Shine Mental Health. The topic for this episode is emotional internalizing. We talk about why you might be an internalizer and what is the path forward towards healthy relationships if you are one. If you are loving this podcast, subscribe. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Counselor Off the Clock. I hope you can get comfortable because we are off the clock.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
So I actually met Shantell at like a networking event.
Yeah, it was a therapist happy hour that I was putting on.
And, you know, networking events sometimes can be weird, but we started talking and it was like, oh, you're getting married in December? Oh, I got married in December.
Yeah.
And then you got pregnant and then I got pregnant. So we've been in this like same phase of life.
Yeah.
So not only are you a counselor, you're also a friend. Yeah. So I am so happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
The topic of today is emotional internalizers. So I'm excited to get into that topic. But before we get started, you've listened to a couple of the episodes, right?
I have, yes.
Okay, so sometimes I start these podcasts with, how are you really, right? Not how are you good, but how are you really?
Yeah, let me pause to take stock. You know, I feel good. My daughter slept good last night, which means I slept good last night. I have my emotional support coffee.
Thank you, Southerners.
Yes, thank you. I had an energizing conversation with some colleagues earlier prior to this. My daughter is in good care of my mother-in-law. I don't know. I feel good. Yeah. Not like the platitude of good, and it's a Friday. So it
is a Friday.
You know, it's like, and the sun is shining outside. So the serotonin is popping. I feel good.
It's so funny, you know, I've asked this question so many times, and often mood is connected to our circumstances. Like when I ask that question, they're like, I got a good night's sleep last night. I'm like, that's not a feeling, you know? Right. You know, how do you feel? And they're like, it's shiny and nice outside, you know? And I'm like, that's not an emotion.
Well, you know, I feel for me, happiness is different than contentment, right? Like I generally feel content the majority of the time. But yeah, happiness is that more like shiny, bubbly essence, I guess. And that is easier for me to access when it's sunny outside. I have realized.
I agree.
Much easier to get in.
Yesterday, I was just like, I'm miserable. Right. I'm done.
Right. Okay, so I had this really cringy moment, and I wonder if this is like universally cringy or if it's just me cringy.
Okay.
So I was at a therapist networking yesterday, and it was at like a restaurant, bar, bowling alley. And I like go up to the bar, and I was getting a beer, and I like straight up waited for like 15 minutes for the bartender to notice me. And I was like, I feel so awkward, you know, because you're like, I don't want to make hard eye contact with them across the bar, but like, I don't think they noticed me, like, you know.
Exactly.
And I was just sitting there, and this other therapist came up, and we were just talking about how awkward it is. Like, it literally is just. So I don't know. I don't know if that's universally cringy, but I had that moment. I was like, okay, I'm just going to feel the cringe.
Yeah.
The cringe.
I don't have that problem because the bartender always notices me.
Because you've got that it factor, that just like stunning. It's like, Lydia has arrived. What? We already have your drink prepared.
Exactly. I don't know how we knew, but this was your drink. Now, do you have like a go-to drink when you're out, like, networking or out with friends. So probably two different kinds of drinks.
Definitely, yeah. If I'm out networking, I'm typically just gonna have like a beer, right? I feel like I'm like more so want something in my hands than like actually enjoying. And I would say over the last year, I've really been getting into like bourbons. Like, well, not really getting in. There's probably some bourbon like aficionados like listening that are like, oh, I know nothing about bourbon. Meaning I've never wanted it before. And then my taste palette has changed a lot since becoming a mom. And I'm really enjoying like some of the profile of bourbon. So I've been kind of like dabbling in that a bit when I'm out on dates or with friends or whatever.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But no, I don't have a go-to drink. It's whatever's like fancy and fun on a menu. I'm like, yeah, do that.
I'm there. Yeah, well, and like we were pregnant and like the things I drank before I was pregnant, and now I'm like, I could never.
Yes, same. What is that about? I wondered that too, because it's the exact same with me, that I'm like, I have zero interest in what I drank before. I don't know if it's because there was such a long break in drinking or what. But
I don't know either. Yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, that your tastes have like changed.
Definitely,
your hormones are weird. Hormones are weird.
I always, with my clients, I talk about hormones like they're like the canary in the coal mine. Like we can infuse science, and especially with like menstrual cycles and talking about emotional internalizing, like that is a tool I use often. But yeah, we don't know, right? Unless you're going to have a hormone panel done, or I know some people that do track their hormones every day and like that's super helpful. But yeah, it's so tricky, right? Like we don't really know. They're just kind of like silently steering the ship.
Yes. Yeah. It's amazing. And I don't think I really noticed it until I got pregnant. And I was like, oh, this is what being hormonal feels like.
Totally.
Because everything is turned up to 11.
Yeah. That overstimulation for me was like the first really huge cue of just like, remember one time like wearing my sunglasses. I remember sending you this picture. I was watching TV with my husband. And I had like my sunglasses on at like 10 p.m. watching TV because the TV was too bright, even though he had turned down the brightness. But it's like, thank you, hormones.
Everything is too loud. The experience. I know. I went to see a movie and I was like, oh my gosh, they have it so loud on. Yeah. This is so disturbing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, that's so relatable.
Thank goodness I'm not pregnant.
Oh my God.
Right now.
Absolutely.
Every day. I'm like, thank goodness.
Yeah, salute to all of you that are put in the time.
You're doing the work.
But yeah.
But thank goodness. And we were both pregnant and seeing clients.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to share a bit about your experience like with that?
Yeah. So in addition to being a therapist, I also teach the university level, which obviously I teach master's level clinicians about clinicians to be. My colleague Alex and I teach the human sexuality class at Vandy. And when I went through, so I'm an alum of that program too. When I went through, we literally never talked about pregnancy, like as a clinician.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I didn't think about it, right? I was like disconnected from that like potential in my life. And anyways, it's not until you're in it, which I know you've had these experiences as well, that you're like, oh my God, I am a walking self-disclosure. Like my body, not just for clients, but literally for like everyone in the world, right? Like anybody that's been pregnant has experienced unsolicited advice, sometimes touching, comments, questions. And I'd say 99.9% in my instance, those were very kind and sweet. And I liked to talk about my pregnancy and I like to talk about that. But still, right? It's a lot of pressure to just like do that at a moment's notice when I'm just in TJ Maxx half asleep,
You're like, I don't really want to talk to you, but you're talking to me.
I know.
And even in a field where it's not normal for us to talk about ourselves very often.
Yeah. Yes. And actually, we have training against that, right?
Exactly. That's like part of our ethics is to really be careful about self-disclosure. Yeah. And automatically being pregnant is a self-disclosure.
1,000%. Yep. It's a self-disclosure that folks project their own stuff onto, right? Yeah. Both excitement, like super exciting clients wanting to know what the sex of my baby was, what names I was thinking about. And all of this, right? It was not ill-intended. All of it was, I'm an important person in their lives and they had questions, right? And then there's the whole maternity leave piece of like coordinating care. And then, you know, what if I'm working with a client that's experienced loss, infertility?
Yeah.
I had a really profound situation where a client prior to working with me had gotten an abortion and her due date was almost to the day of my due date. So what a really impactful moment that we were able to together be like, her feel very affirmed in her decision, noticing me and my body changing and, you know, my maternity leave preparation. But all of that required me as therapist to use myself and my experience as the tool in the moment. And that was powerful, but also very difficult and had to seek a lot of supervision, consultation.
Right. Because it's kind of like against your will.
Yeah.
I didn't choose to bring this into the room.
100%. Yep.
It's just brought into the room.
Yep.
You know, and have you ever had any, what I'm thinking about is like, I had to vomit in the middle of a session.
I never experienced that, but I have read about people that have.
Yeah. And like that happened. And how many moments of like humanity.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I've had in my sessions.
Yeah.
Where as much as we are taught to kind of be in a professional space, I'm still a person and this is still a relationship and things are happening to me.
Totally.
Even as I'm sitting with a client. I can't like turn it off.
Or your baby is kicking your ribs.
Totally.
Or you scarf down a snack right before your client came. You have like lava heartburn. That's for me. I never had to puke, but I had massive heartburn all the time, but even in the 3rd trimester. And I remember just being like, you know, like swallowing it down. Like I'm attuning to my client, but I'm on fire.
This is not the time.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know. I always was like, okay, I won't eat during a session. But when I was pregnant, it was a necessity.
Sure.
I was like, I have to eat a snack. Yeah. And it was amazing. If you've never been to therapy before, how much humanness there is with sitting with another person in a room, even if it's a professional.
Yeah.
And so most of my clients were like, heck yes, eat a snack.
Yeah.
I'll eat a snack. Let's both have snacks.
Yeah. I had a client a couple of weeks ago. We were doing a double session and she was eating grapes. She's like, do you want a grape? And I was like, no. And she's like, are you sure they're really good? And I was like, sure.
Sure.
You know, I was like, I do want to have that Costco grape. But yeah, we're human, right? Like, and I think like when we lose that, that's when, I don't know, I can just feel like therapy can get misguided and you can feel powerful and that's just not the way that I want to do this thing, you know?
Yeah. There are like orientations of therapy that are like, we are a blank slate.
Yeah.
And I really struggled to connect with that idea that I'm a blank slate because self-disclosure happens even when we don't choose to have it happen.
Well, and honestly, and I think when we think about who founded the science of therapy, it is old white men. Cis.
Preach.
Heterosexual men.
Yep.
And so it's like, yes, a blank slate might have worked back in the 60s or 70s. Well, I don't know that it worked. I think it works for a subset of the population.
Yes.
But in my experience, being outwardly queer, outwardly some of my other forms of self-disclosure on my website, it's just so much. I have so many people come to me like saying like, thank you for putting this. Like I chose you because of XYZ disclosure. And so, yeah, the attention is never on me, but I think it's safety seeking. Like you and I have both been on the side of the client looking for a therapist. And I think breadcrumbing safety is something that's really important. I talk with my students about that too, like how to do that ethically, how to do it in a way that, I don't know, that promotes that safety and not attention on me, but rather like, hey, this is information that you should consider during your search for a therapist.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about on this podcast, like how to find a therapist that is a good fit for you.
Sure.
And when you are a therapist who discloses at least something about yourself. Well, everything is a self-disclosure. A picture on a website is even a self-disclosure. People make judgments about it. But people can make judgments and make decisions. And part of that might be, I want to choose a therapist who's queer like me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that knows my lived experience, or knows, at least has that experience of navigating life with their own version of it. But just, there's so much that's unsaid, in those moments. And I find it to be really powerful.
Yeah. So for our listeners who are not your clients, which is probably the majority of people listening to this, hopefully, I don't know, your clients might flood our listeners. So for those who are not your clients, what is it like sitting in a session with you?
What's it like sitting in a session with me? I would say if you asked 10 of my clients that, you'd get 10 different answers.
Interesting.
I think, and I tend to tell most of my folks, like on an initial like inquiry call with me, that I think part of my expertise is also knowing when things aren't going well, right? And knowing, like, I really view the first like 3 to 5 sessions, I'm getting to know you. I'm getting to know what works for you. I'm getting to know what doesn't. I'm getting to know like what I'll see, because I work with a lot of sexual violence, is I want to also informally assess like my client's relationship to their body. So, we're talking about something, where do you feel that in your body? I'm noticing my heart is racing. Okay, what's it like if we just place a loving hand right there and we just sit? We don't push the anger, the fear away. We just sit in it. And then I am assessing, what is my client's discomfort in that moment? And is it a tolerable discomfort? Is it discomfort where it takes a moment? Does that alone make my client dissociate, right? Or do I start to feel this disconnection happening in the room? And so from those moments, right, I don't know, I guess I'm just assessing like how I can titrate in more connection to body. And that's different for every client, because I work with a lot of neurodiverse clients as well. And so just, I guess, what's a session with me like? It's this blend of whatever's working for you. Sometimes that's internal family systems, and we do a lot of parts work. Sometimes it's all somatic. Sometimes it's I have a lot of cognitive people who want to do more like a CBT or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it does sound like the most important foundational thing for you is to maintain presence and groundedness in a session with your clients.
Yes.
That, we can layer on all types of modalities.
Right.
But if we don't have that groundedness,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think about Frank Anderson. He's an IFS person, like famous in that world. And
IFS, can you define that for our,
definitely.
our listeners?
IFS. Internal family systems.
Got
So
it.
the way that I talk about IFS is we are comprised of different parts. I kind of talk about them like characters almost. Like similar to Inside Out, the movie, when anything happens, we have feelings, we have sensations, we have experiences that come forward to protect us. And Frank talks about, like, we're on a first name basis.
Frank.
Would love to be friends with Frank Anderson.
Frank, if you're listening to this,
I'll send it to you, Frank. Anyways, he talks about, like, he's like this bigwig in IFS, and he's like, I don't even like tell my clients about all the psychoed or the framework of IFS, because it doesn't matter. It only matters if they want that information. I don't know. I don't remember what your initial question was, but
we were talking about, like what it's like to sit with you in the groundedness that needs to be maintained.
Sure.
I guess the connection that needs to be maintained in a session.
Yeah. I try really hard, and I tell my students this too, if I'm noticing my client in front of me responding, if I'm noticing tears well up, we're pausing whatever we're talking about. What's coming up for you right now? It seems to me like there's some pain rising in your body. nothing I'm going to say, no cognitive thing they're going to say is going to be more important or more profound than tapping in and feeling the sensation that's coming up in their body. And then we can cover all the things you want to talk about after, but we have to tune in.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, I appreciate that like reframe. It is all about presence with me and all about attuning and providing my client with a corrective emotional experience that they may not have received in childhood or adolescence or adulthood.
Yeah. That when tears are coming up, we don't push through.
Yes.
We pay attention to whatever's here in the moment.
Totally.
And that's enough. That's enough content for a session.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I tell everybody too, I'm like, therapy is, you're going to spend a lot of time, you're going to spend a lot of money. And so you're going to leave with tools. Like I think I try to do like, okay, let's try this tool, this homework. But none of that, it has to, in order to like percolate and marinate into somebody's being, it's got to be connected to body, in my opinion.
Yeah. I love that. And it's definitely a place where I struggle and where I am on my own therapy journey of I'm a really heady person.
Sure.
And so to integrate something really heady into where do I feel that in my body?
Yeah.
Let's give some love and care to that. Oh, I'd rather just analyze it.
Totally. Oh my God. Intellectualizing is so much more fun than feeling our feelings. Same.
It is so much more fun. Well, I would love to hop into our topic, emotional internalizers.
Yeah.
Why is this topic important to you?
Why is it important to me? I just think it is so... It's everywhere, right? Like emotional internalizing, it's cross-diagnostic, meaning that it shows up in all diagnoses that I work with, whether it's someone struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD. We see internalizing across the board, right? And when I'm saying internalizing, I'm intentionally being vague, right? I'm intentionally using this really large catch-all, and that's the inverse of externalizing. So externalizing is maybe more so folks that like blow up in conflict or have a lot of big explosive behaviors. The internalizers are the inverse of that, right? I am going to just take and take and take, push down, push down, push down because I don't want to bother you. I don't want to bother that person. I don't want to set a boundary. I don't want to rock the boat. Right? I don't want to disprove or displease that person. But what we don't realize is like you're abandoning yourself then in that moment. You're hurting yourself for the sake of not hurting someone else's feelings.
Yeah. So there's going to be feelings that come up. Period. End of sentence. You can't stop that.
No.
And then you can kind of decide. I mean, it's hard to know, but there's a way that you then take care of those, either blowing up and yelling or crying or sabotaging relationships, or it blows up inside. It's going to blow up somewhere.
Totally.
And so for you see emotional internalizing across multiple situations.
Yeah, absolutely. 1,000%.
So when you're sitting with a client, how do you know that they are emotionally internalizing?
Well, I think that is also what a lot of clients seek me out for. I advertise that I specialize in emotional internalizing.
Well, how do they know then? How do they know they're an emotional internalizer?
That's a great question. I am very specific on my website of saying like, what is emotional internalizing? Why do we do it? Right? And I think like going back to the root of how you learn to be a human from your caregivers, right? How were feelings modeled in the home, right? What did you see implicitly, aka like how your parents or your caregivers showed up in the world, and explicitly, like what were you told about feelings?
Can you give us an example of a message that would have caused emotional internalizing?
Yeah, absolutely. Just suppression. I was just talking about this with a client, talking about like no one in their families talked about feelings ever. And so they had big feelings, and it was just kind of masked as bad behavior. Oh, you can't concentrate at school. You're bouncing off the walls, this. And so she, as a female, as a femme person, just internalized, right? Like swallowed it down, didn't talk about it. And instead, developmentally, a lot of us will then develop these negative beliefs, right? Of like, oh, I'm a burden. When I'm angry, I'm a burden. When I'm sad, I'm going to let somebody down. When I have a need or I'm uncomfortable, I'm trying to think of one that came up this week.
I'm an inconvenience.
Inconvenience. Yeah, absolutely.
My big emotions are hard for other people to deal with.
Yeah.
And so I am going to keep them to myself because I love my caregiver.
Yes.
I love my friends. I love my family.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so those messages, even though they're not explicitly said, hey, little Timmy,
right,
we don't do emotions in this house.
Right.
Sometimes that's actually said, but
Yeah.
for the most part, it could be there are no conversations.
Yeah. And actually, one of my big populations that I specialize in is adult children of alcoholics.
So how does emotionally internalizing and American?
In America.
In American, the children of alcoholics.
Adult children of alcoholics. It's quite a mouthful.
Is it also Americans?
Americans, Bunny's home videos. ACA stands for Adult Children of Alcoholics / Family Dysfunction. And so there's a lot of people, it's a 12-step program, or 12-step adjacent. It's not as strictly 12-step as ACA, NA, OA, these other established 12-step programs. But it also encompasses family dysfunction. So there's a lot of folks in those rooms from high control environments, right? High control religious institutions or families, families where eating disorders are really prevalent in their family of origin, personality disorders. So a parent with borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder.
So what I'm hearing is the family systems are very similar in all of these environments because it's centered around maybe one individual in the family.
1,000%.
Got it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when that happens, right, especially what is often happening in these families, my family of origin is also, I'm part of this program. I've been in ACA for about 4.5 years. Shout out to my home group. What typically tends to happen in these families is we experience amounts of chronic stress, ongoing trauma, and we are taught either out loud, explicitly, or implicitly, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel.
Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel.
Everything you're experiencing is off limits because it is in service to the alcoholic or in service to the person who is very hurt and kind of wounding the family in whatever way their experience is manifesting.
Got it. So like my experience doesn't matter as much as making sure the family system stays afloat.
Yes.
And catering to a single member of the family.
Yeah. And so clinically, that's where my work with emotional internalizing comes in. I am constantly telling my clients, I want to turn the volume down on that person, whoever the person was in your life, and I want to turn the volume up on you. So I'm often saying to clients, because a lot of betrayal comes up within these families of, if I speak truth, right? If I start, even if that family member isn't in the room, which usually they never are in my instance, my clients will still feel betrayal. I can't talk about my dad like that. I can't talk about my mom like that. And so I'm often saying, look, the beauty of this space, I'm never going to meet your mom unless you want me to. I'm never going to meet your dad. He's never going to come in. Can we start to turn the volume down on that protective factor? And I want to turn the volume up on you and your experience.
So how does turning the volume up help with emotional internalizing?
Inherently, right? Like I'm getting all of those emotions that are gunked up, the frozen grief is what I call it, out into the open.
Can you talk about frozen grief?
Yes. Frozen grief is, I got it from 12-step rooms. It's the experience that we walk around with pain and wounds and experiences from childhood and adolescence that never really got talked about, or maybe were just so ongoing, right? Like I'm thinking about interpersonal violence and substance usage, excessive substance usage in the home. And it just became normal. And so our bodies, we just carry it around. And it's kind of, I liken it to a bruise. Like it hurts when it happens, but then we learn to live with it until it gets knocked or triggered. And then we might see that show up in romantic relationships, platonic relationships, workplace environments, right? Sometimes I am a very spiritual person. And so I believe that the world draws people in to kind of continue to help us heal our wounds from childhood. If we're at a place where we're resourced enough to do that work. But and so I tend to, if a boss is bothering one of my clients, I'm like, okay, who does that boss remind you of? And they'll be like, oh shit, my dad. I'm like, okay, exactly. Talk about that.
Yeah, it just keeps showing up and keeps showing up and invites you to work on it, heal it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the invitation is there.
Yes, always.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, it's easy to blame others. I need to get out of this toxic work environment when really it's an invitation to work on the stuff that's coming up.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if anyone's listening and they're intrigued or interested in ACA or anything I've said feels resonant, that's what I feel like the program has helped me with the most, because I came into that room truly at an emotional bottom and just not knowing, I don't know how to micromanage or control the thing anymore. Wow. And, I had so many therapists tell me so many times, you need to go, I'm like, no, not me. And I laugh because so many of us enter those rooms trying to get tools to fix our families.
Ooh. Yeah.
And then you realize really quick that that's not what the work is. The work is to detach with love, and the work is to focus on yourself. And I think me as a therapist, that's where I can intersect and kind of help folks do that work too.
Yeah. So when you're working with people that are emotional internalizers and you're recognizing a dysfunctional system, I think I'm seeing a lot on the internet about like adult children cutting off their parents.
Sure.
And is that your first go-to? Is we need to cut them off or we need space from them?
No, I would not say that's my first go-to. I have never met, personally or professionally, someone who's wanted to estrange from a family member. I think some of the rhetoric on the internet is that we millennials or whatever age range are just making boundaries and cutting people off. And it's not about that. It's about, thankfully, we are resourced and supported, and we don't want to tolerate neglect and abuse and hurt. Yeah. And so, no, my first go-to is not formal estrangement with my clients and with myself personally. It's detaching. Right? What does it look like to show up less with that person that's hurt you? Right? What's it look like? What's it feel like to pull away for a little bit and really just kind of take, I call it like a breather. Just take a moment, journal what comes up. Lots of times it's loyalty. Lots of times it's obligation. This has been my family role for my whole childhood. I'm now not micromanaging my caregiver. You know what I mean? Whatever the situation is.
That's uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly.
To now show up differently in a family system.
Yeah. My friend, Sarah Jane, who's, she does a lot of really phenomenal work with body positivity and neutrality around, like in the tarot world and just the yoga world. And she's always reminding me of the acronym LOVE. Stands for Let Others Voluntarily Evolve. And I'm always reminding myself, my clients, that of it's not my job. It's not within my control to make somebody else change. Yeah.
And so I can only adjust myself.
Yes.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, I'm hearing emotional internalizing and emotional externalizing.
Yeah.
And what would be the goal when you are working with an emotional internalizing by turning that up? Is it to become an externalizer?
Yeah, a lot of times. Yeah. A lot of times my folks that are emotional internalizers are conflict avoidance. I tend to see those things go hand in hand. And so they'll say things like, I don't want my client to, or I don't want my partner to resent me. I don't want my partner to be angry. I'm like, why not? Within a safe and secure relationship, we're going to resent each other once in a while. We're going to be angry with each other.
Yeah.
What's on the other side of conflict is intimacy.
Oh, wow.
Whenever we walk into emotional battle with someone, when we're with a safe, secure, and capable person, we come out of that with more closeness, more intimacy, more connection. And so a lot of times, yes, I am having to kind of like convince people to stand up for themselves or assert themselves or bring up that thing that's been bothering them. And that inherently is externalizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then facing a fear. They're going to leave. They're going to hate me.
Right.
They're going to do the thing that my family of origin did.
Yes, absolutely.
I learned how to suppress myself in order to keep the peace or keep somebody happy.
Yeah.
What if I don't do that? Then I'm not going to keep the peace. I'm not going to keep somebody happy.
Right.
And there's a lot of work in counseling that can be done supporting you through, well, what if that happens?
Yeah. I tell my clients it's like an exposure. Right? Like if you are afraid of snakes, we might do a distress hierarchy around how are we going to have you tolerate an in vivo exposure of thinking about a snake? How would we then tolerate maybe a snake in the room or in the building? It's the same thing with conflict. Like I use the same ERP model for conflict in a lot of ways of like, what's a 10 of distress versus what's a 2? And oftentimes I hear like, just telling my partner I'm frustrated with them is like a 6 or a 7 or an 8. And so then we've really got to like take some baby steps to get there.
Yeah. I like what you said that we're not doing this just to piss people off.
No.
Like this isn't selfish to turn your own volume up.
Yeah.
It's actually to have greater connection with people.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can just imagine, even with my own husband, right? When I withhold in order to keep him happy, he feels disconnected from me.
Totally.
He would rather hear it all.
Yep.
Even if it was something he didn't want to hear.
Yep.
Because then we can work through it and he knows where I stand.
Totally. And then you're honest, right?
And then I'm honest.
There is an essence and an energy in the room, in the house, right? Our homes being our sanctuaries, when we are honest with ourselves, with our partners. And it is really a disservice to the relationship to withhold that, right? Saying as somebody, obviously I work with emotional internalizers because I am an emotional internalizer.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, if you are looking for a therapist, the things they specialize in are probably the things they've worked through themselves.
Don't call me out here. Don't call me out. You're calling too many people out here.
Right. Just want to say, spoiler alert. Yeah, it's what you just said is so relatable though in that way. It's so real. I think so many of us struggle with that.
Because ultimately we want to be in loving relationships.
Yep.
And we're doing this in order to love the other person.
Yes.
It feels like.
Yes.
I'm internalizing so that I can be good for them.
Yeah. Well, especially as moms, right? Like I'm internalizing because my sweet feral child is screaming for her 5th cracker and she's teething and my partner's telling me about their day at work and the dishes need to be done and where are my needs, right? Where's room for that? It's really hard.
Yeah. So what would be like a first step for a person who's listening to this and identifying, oh my gosh, I'm an emotional internalizer. I've been a part of a dysfunctional system. I've not been listening to myself.
Yeah.
What's something that they could be doing in order to turn that volume up?
What's a good first step? I think really that honesty we were talking about. Being honest with yourself of how this is getting in the way of who you want to be as a person. That's often the exploration I'm doing with clients because they'll come in with really vague goals, right? Of like, I want to fight less or I want to fight better or I want to
be happier.
I want to be happier. I want to speak my mind. And it's like, okay, why? Right? what is the purpose? What's the reasoning behind it? And it almost kind of gives us a map of how are we going to know that you got better? Like in 6 months, 3 months, 3 weeks, how am I going to know that any of this is working for you? Right? I want to revisit that version of yourself that came and sat on this couch the first session that couldn't look their partner in the eye, or telling, their boss about a boundary was off the charts distress. That is the most fulfilling work as a therapist, when I'm able to look back retrospectively with clients. It's one of my favorite parts of the job.
Yeah, I get to be a witness to the growth process happening in front of me, and I get to remind them of who they were and who they are now.
Yeah, 1,000%.
They're living it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
they forget, oh yeah, that was hard for me.
Right.
We remember.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I saw this meme that was like, it was a therapist saying an old client had reached out. I was like, I don't know if you remember me, da 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 da. And then the response was, are you kidding me? I just saw a red bird in the tree and it made me think of that time you saw that with your mom. It's like, yeah, we collect all of these stories and these experiences. And like, God, I could not think of a more incredible job.
I believe that. How do you feel like that impacts you as a person and now a mom, holding all of these stories within you?
Yeah. Every day is different, right? And I think if there's any therapists listening to this, especially if you're new in the field, so much of learning how to be a therapist, an effective therapist, a sustainable, a healthy therapist, is about expansion, right? Is it about emotionally, how do I metabolize what I'm hearing from the people in front of me? And I have a lot of protective things in place. I talk with my students about this too, because I didn't get a lot of information in grad school about how to do this for the long term, right? My first few jobs, first job I'll say as a therapist, was incredibly taxing and overwhelming, and a high caseload and a low salary and all of these things that made life really hard. And I think that experience was really helpful for me to realize my limits and what I have to do and how I have to take care of myself. Because you're right, I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, I'm so many other things besides a therapist. Yeah, and I need to make sure that those roles are given just as much energy, if not more.
Yeah. So being aware that we're taking in information and knowing how to process that and have a container for it so that we can live our lives.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we're cold towards it. We think about our clients.
Oh, yeah.
But we have to have a way to live our lives while also knowing that every day we talk about trauma.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if people have just kind of zoned out through this whole conversation, we have gotten, just given them some company while they've lived their lives.
Sure. Did their
they
dishes.
Have this on in the background. We've just kept them company. What's one thing they can take from this conversation?
Such a good question. What's coming up is you are worth it. Like, not in this really phony way, but you are worth living a life that feels authentic and centered and grounded and creative and embodied, right? Your people want to help you. Your people want to know you, right? Your therapist wants to know you. Your family hopefully wants to know you. And that intimacy, that authenticity lies on the other side of you being honest with yourself.
And uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's evolving, right? So many of my clients are always like, why? And I do this too, right? I just hit an emotional bottom, and I was talking about this in a meeting last week of like, why am I still struggling with this thing? And it's because development and healing is a helix. It's kind of like a spring. Like, we hit different areas of it. And the goal of what we do in therapy is not to not feel the feelings. It's not to not have the triggers again. It's just to know that you have your own back and that you're going to be triggered for less long, and you're going to fall and fail forward. And yeah, I'm not a very concise person, so I don't know if that's like the one nugget of wisdom, but it's the thing that came up for me of just,
you're worth it.
You're worth it. You're worth doing this work and investing in yourself, right? Whether it's investment of time, money, energy, all of the above. Especially if you're a parent, especially if you're a parent of a new little one. God, do we have to integrate and explore and, excavate all the stuff that's coming up for us. And I think that is inevitable. It's so valuable for me, the spaces I have for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. I know any amount of time away from our little ones is a sacrifice.
Sure.
Yes, I love sitting with you and chatting, but it's also like we have little ones that we want to be with and that we love.
Yes.
And so I'm so thankful for your sacrifice to be here, and just your kindness for our listeners and for your clients.
Yeah.
If you are loving what you're hearing, subscribe, rate our podcast, share with your friends. If this really hits for you, share this with your partner. Something that could even start the conversations to explain maybe what an emotional internalizer is and how you relate to this. How can the people find you?
You can find me. My website is shinementalhealth.com. Shine like a diamond. SHINE mentalhealth.com.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'm Lydia Thompson, and this is Shantell Johnson. Do you go by Johnson or Jones and professionally?
Johnson-Jones.
Johnson-Jones. This is Shantell Johnson-Jones. Amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
And tune in next time. You can also find us on TikTok and Instagram. Yes. Counselor Off the Clock. And can people find you at Shine Mental Health?
No. I mean, I do. There is a little Instagram, but it's like so old.
Don't find Shantell online. Just go to her website.
Yeah, that's your best bet.
Amazing. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.
You're worth it.
You're worth it.
Worth it. Let me work it.
That is.